When my son stopped calling me Mom, I didn't realize it at first. It happened quietly like most changes do. There wasn't a big fight or some dramatic goodbye. It was just silence. A small word left unsaid. I remember the day it finally hit me. I was standing by the kitchen sink washing dishes after dinner. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of running water. He had called earlier that evening. I was so happy to hear his voice. It had been weeks since his last call. But somewhere in the middle of our short conversation, I noticed he hadn't called me Mom once. He said, "Hey, how are you doing?" Not, "Hey, Mom." Just, "Hey." And when he hung up, he said, "All right, take care. Okay?" Not, "Love you, Mom." Just, "Take care." After I put down the phone, I stood there for a while, dishcloth in hand, staring at the window. Outside it was raining lightly, the kind of rain that makes everything look softer. I thought maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe he was just distracted, busy with his new life, his new wife. But the next few calls were the same. And slowly, I began to realize that the word Mom had disappeared from his vocabulary. He still talked to me, still asked about my health, still sounded polite, but something had shifted. There was a distance now, something invisible but real. It's strange how a single word can hold so much warmth. Mom. It used to be filled with laughter, with love, with all those years of scraped knees, bedtime stories, and birthday candles. Now it was gone, and in its place was formality, caution, like he was speaking to someone he respected but no longer felt close to. I never told anyone about it. Not my sister, not my neighbor, not even my best friend. Felt too small to explain, too hard to justify. Who complains about their grown son not saying Mom? But for me it was like watching a photograph fade. Slowly, painfully, and without anyone noticing but me. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I've learned that love doesn't always fade in anger. Sometimes it just drifts away quietly, like a boat untying itself from the shore. And maybe that's what this story is about. Not anger, not blame, just the quiet spaces that grow between people who used to be close. My name is Margaret, though hardly anyone calls me that anymore. For most of my life, I was just Mom. Or Mama. When my son was little and couldn't quite say the word right. He was my only child, Daniel. My whole world from the day I brought him home from the hospital in that soft blue blanket my sister knitted. I still remember how tiny he looked in my arms, like he could fit in the palm of my hand. I was terrified I'd do something wrong. But the moment he wrapped his little fingers around mine, I knew I'd figure it out. I wasn't perfect, but I loved him with everything I had. His father and I divorced when Daniel was 6. We tried to make it work, but some things just fall apart quietly. He moved a few towns over, and I kept the house, a small 2-bedroom place with creaky floors and a backyard full of dandelions Daniel used to call wish flowers. Every spring, he'd run around blowing those little white seeds into the air, making wishes. I'd ask him what he wished for, and he'd grin and say, "You, Mom. Always you." That memory still warms me. Sometimes I wonder if he remembers it too. Raising him alone wasn't easy. There were nights I sat at the kitchen table with bills spread out in front of me, feeling the weight of every dollar I didn't have. I worked double shifts at the diner downtown. The kind of job where you come home smelling like coffee and bacon grease, your feet sore but your heart full because you know your child's sleeping safely in his bed. Daniel was a quiet kid, thoughtful, the kind who'd rather sit with a book than run wild with the neighborhood kids. He'd ask a lot of questions, about the stars, about God, about why people stopped loving each other. I never had all the answers, but I told him the truth as best I could. People change, I said once, but love, real love, it stays. He seemed to like that answer. Through his teenage years, we were close. Of course, we had our moments. Arguments about curfews, his messy room, the usual things. But he always came back to me. Even when he was upset, he'd knock on my door late at night and whisper, "Sorry, Mom," like he couldn't sleep until things were right again. When he left for college, I cried the whole drive home. The house felt too big, too quiet. I'd stand in his empty room sometimes just to feel close to him. I didn't tell him that, of course. I wanted him to have his freedom. To live, to grow, to make mistakes. Isn't that what mothers are supposed to do? Raise them so they can leave you someday? He'd call often in those days. Short calls at first, then longer ones when he got lonely or homesick. He'd tell me about his classes, the friends he was making, the girl he liked. I loved hearing about his life. I lived for those calls. Then came the day he told me about her, Emily. His voice was different when he said her name. Softer somehow. There was something in it I hadn't heard before. Hope, excitement, maybe even a bit of fear. I could tell she mattered. He brought her home for Thanksgiving that year. I remember how nervous I was setting the table just right, baking his favorite pumpkin pie, fluffing the couch pillows. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted her to like me. And she did, at first. Emily was polite, sweet even. She offered to help with dishes and complimented my cooking. I remember thinking this could be good. She could be good for him. Daniel looked at her the way his father used to look at me once, like she was his whole world. After that, things moved fast. They got engaged the following summer, and by the time he finished college, they were planning the wedding. I was proud of him. Proud and a little scared. It's strange, the way joy and fear can live side by side in a mother's heart. You're happy for them, but a small part of you knows this is the beginning of letting go. The wedding was beautiful. A small church, white roses everywhere, Emily in lace. I cried, of course, though I tried not to. During the mother-son dance, he held me close and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Mom." I remember that so clearly. His voice in my ear, the music soft and slow, the smell of his cologne mixed with the faint scent of cake and flowers. If I'd known that would be the last time he'd call me Mom, with that kind of love in his voice, I think I would have held on a little longer. After the wedding, they moved 2 hours away. Close enough to visit, far enough to feel the distance. At first, he'd call often. They'd come for dinner once or twice a month. Emily would bring dessert, and I'd try not to hover or ask too many questions. But then the visits got fewer. The calls shorter. Sometimes I'd call and get his voicemail, and he'd text later saying he was busy. I told myself it was normal. Newlyweds have their own lives. I didn't want to be that mother, the one who clings too hard or complains too much. So I gave him space. And that's how the silence started. I didn't mean to drift apart. I just thought I was doing what good mothers do, stepping back, letting him live his life. But sometimes, when I'd sit alone at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, I'd catch myself listening for the phone to ring. It's funny how quiet can become a sound all its own. At first, I told myself it was just life. Everyone gets busy. People change, routines shift. But the truth is, I started to feel him slipping away in the small things. It wasn't anything dramatic. Just less warmth in his voice. Fewer questions about how I was doing. Calls that used to last 20 minutes now ended in 5. I'd ask about his week, and he'd say, "Oh, same old," before changing the subject. If I mentioned missing him, he'd chuckle softly and say, "Ah, Mom, you worry too much." He still visited sometimes, usually on holidays. I'd spend days preparing, cleaning the house, cooking all his favorites, setting the table just right. But when they'd arrive, the air felt different. Not cold, exactly, but distant. Emily would smile politely, but her eyes were always on her phone, or she'd excuse herself to check on work emails. Daniel would notice the tension, I think, but he never said much. He'd try to keep the mood light. "Come on, Mom," he'd say, laughing softly. "You're overthinking again." Maybe I was. Maybe I always have been. But there was one visit I'll never forget. It was early spring, chilly but sunny. I'd made roast chicken, his favorite since he was a boy. I set out the good dishes, the floral ones I only used for special occasions. When they arrived, I could tell right away something was off. Emily barely said hello before walking to the living room, scrolling through her phone. Daniel gave me a quick hug, not the warm, lingering kind I was used to, just a polite squeeze and a hey. During dinner, conversation felt forced. I asked about their new apartment, about his job, about how they were settling in. Emily answered most of the questions. Daniel just nodded along, smiling here and there. When I offered them seconds, Emily said, "No, thank you. We're trying to eat lighter these days." I smiled, but it stung more than it should have. I'd spent hours in that kitchen. Every bite had love in it. Later that night, as I was packing leftovers, I overheard them talking in the living room. Their voices were low, but I could hear the edge in hers. She's just too much sometimes, Emily whispered. She means well, Daniel said quietly. I know, but she makes everything such a big deal. You saw her face when I didn't eat the chicken. She just wants us to be happy. I get that. But we're adults now. She needs to give us space. I froze there, holding the container, my hands trembling just a little. I didn't mean to listen. I really didn't. But once you hear words like that, you can't unhear them. That night, after they left, I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. The food was still warm on the counter, untouched. I thought about what she said, too much. Maybe she was right. Maybe I loved too loudly. Maybe I didn't know how to step back quietly enough. After that, I tried harder to give them space. I stopped calling as often. I told myself it was healthy, that they needed time to build their own life. But deep down, I was waiting for him to notice the quiet, to reach out first. Weeks went by, then months. Sometimes he'd text. Short messages like, "Hey, how are you?" or "We'll visit soon." I'd type long replies, but he'd respond with a single emoji or a "sounds good." It's strange how a person's absence can fill a room. His voice used to echo in this house. The sound of his laughter, his footsteps on the stairs, even the way he used to hum while brushing his teeth. Now all that was replaced by the sound of silence and the ticking of the old wall clock. One day, about a year after their wedding, he called unexpectedly. My heart jumped when I saw his name on the screen. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered, trying not to sound too eager. "Hey Mom," he said. Just hearing that word again, it warmed me instantly. But as the call went on, I realized something was different. His voice was careful, distant. "Emily and I have been talking," he said after a long pause. "We think it might be good to have some boundaries." "Boundaries?" I repeated softly. "What do you mean, honey?" "You know," he said, "just space. We're trying to build our own rhythm, our own traditions." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. My throat felt tight. "Of course," I said quietly. "I understand." He sighed with relief, like he'd been bracing for an argument. "Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd get it." That night, I sat in my rocking chair by the window, the one he'd helped me fix years ago, and watched the moon rise over the trees. Boundaries. Such a polite word for distance. From then on, things were never quite the same. Holidays changed first. That Christmas, they spent the morning with her family. He called in the afternoon, apologetic but cheerful. "We'll come by next weekend," he said. They didn't. On my birthday, he sent flowers. The card said, "Happy birthday, Margaret." I told myself it was a mistake. Maybe the florist got it wrong. But when I called to thank him, he said, "Oh yeah, I just thought it looked nice that way." I laughed it off, but my chest ached afterward. Little by little, Mom became you, and I love you became take care. Then came the visit that broke something in me for good. It was late summer. I hadn't seen them in months. When they arrived, I was so excited I forgot to hide it. I hugged him a little too tightly maybe. Emily looked uncomfortable, so I let go quickly. We sat in the living room, making small talk. She told me about her promotion, their upcoming vacation. I smiled, nodding, asking questions. Daniel mostly listened, glancing at his phone now and then. At one point, I brought out an old photo album. Pictures of him as a child. At the lake, his first bike, his high school graduation. I thought it might warm things up. But when I placed it on the table, Emily frowned slightly. "Oh, I've seen most of these," she said. "You've sent him so many already." Daniel chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, Mom loves her photo albums," he said. "It was meant as a joke, I know. But it stung anyway." I closed the album gently. "I'll put it away," I said softly. After they left that evening, I noticed something on the counter, a forgotten coffee mug. The one I'd given him years ago with "World's Best Son" written across it in faded letters. He must have used it that morning. I picked it up and held it close, feeling the warmth that still lingered. For a moment, it felt like he was still here. Like nothing had changed. But when I washed it and placed it back in the cupboard, I knew deep down, it would probably stay there untouched for a long time. Over the next year, contact grew even thinner. Texts once a month. Calls only on holidays. I tried not to take it personally, but some nights, when the house felt especially quiet, I'd replay old voicemails just to hear him say Mom again. One day, I finally decided to visit. I told myself it was just to drop off some homemade jam, but really, I just wanted to see him. When I got to their house, Emily answered the door. She looked surprised. Not rude, exactly, just unprepared. "Oh, Margaret," she said, forcing a smile. "Daniel's out right now. You should have called first." I nodded quickly. "Of course. I just wanted to drop this off." I handed her the small basket. She took it politely but didn't invite me in. "That's so sweet of you," she said. "I'll tell him you stopped by." I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. "Tell him I said hi," I whispered. She nodded, then closed the door gently. I stood on the porch for a long time after that. The wind was picking up, rustling the trees. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear laughter, children playing down the street. And I thought about how fast life moves on, how people we love can live just miles away and still feel like strangers. When I got home, the phone was silent. No missed calls. No messages. That was the day I realized something had truly shifted. Love hadn't disappeared exactly. It had just been replaced. By routine. By politeness. By something safer, cleaner, less risky. And as painful as it was, I couldn't blame him. He was living his life. Building something new. Maybe, in his own way, he thought he was protecting me. From disappointment, from being too attached, from whatever guilt children carry when they move too far ahead. Still that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I whispered into the quiet, "Good night, my boy." There was no answer. Just the sound of the wind against the window, and the steady hum of the refrigerator in the next room. The last real conversation we ever had began on a Saturday morning that looked ordinary enough. Sunlight spilled through the lace curtains, the kettle whistled, and I was watering the little fern Daniel had given me years before. I remember thinking how grown the plant had become, how it had taken root, stretching toward the light without needing much from me anymore. The phone rang. It was Daniel. "Hey," he said. His voice sounded hesitant, as if he were rehearsing something in his head. I smiled instinctively. "Daniel, I was just thinking of you. How are you, sweetheart?" He cleared his throat. "I'm okay. Listen, can we talk about something?" My heart lifted. "Of course, honey. What's going on?" There was a pause. I could hear a faint hum in the background, maybe the TV, maybe traffic. Then he said it. "Mom, Emily's pregnant." For a moment the world stilled. Then warmth rushed through me. "Oh, Daniel," I whispered, tears filling my eyes. "That's wonderful news. I'm so proud of you both." He laughed, but it wasn't the carefree laugh I remembered. "Yeah, thanks. We're excited. It's just, we're trying to keep things simple this year. No big visits or anything until the baby's here." "Oh, of course," I said quickly. "You two need your space. But Daniel, you'll let me know if you need anything, right? I can help." "I could come for a week or two after the baby," he interrupted softly. "We actually talked about that. Emily's mom is planning to stay with us for a while after the birth. She's already rearranged her schedule." I didn't know what to say. My fingers tightened around the phone. "Oh, I see. I just don't want you to feel left out," he added. "It's just she and her mom have a system. And the apartment's small." "Of course," I murmured. "I understand." We talked a few more minutes, about doctors, baby names, work, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. When the call ended, I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the fern. It looked fine, healthy, green, alive, but suddenly I felt something inside me wither. The months that followed were a blur of silence. I tried not to intrude. I sent one small package when I found a soft-knitted blanket on sale, yellow with tiny ducks. Emily sent a brief thank you text. That was all. When the baby arrived, I didn't find out from Daniel. I saw the news on social media. A friend from church called me that morning. "Congratulations," she said brightly. "The pictures are just precious." "Pictures?" I repeated. "What pictures?" By the time I found them online, there were already dozens of comments. Emily in the hospital bed, Daniel beside her, both smiling down at their newborn son. The caption read, "Welcome to the world, little Noah. Our hearts are full." I stared at the screen for a long time. My chest felt tight, as if I'd run a mile. I wasn't angry, just hollow. I waited for a call that day. And the next. It came a week later. "Hey Mom," Daniel said. His voice sounded tired but happy. "Sorry it took so long to call. It's been crazy." "I saw the photos," I said softly. "He's beautiful." "Yeah," he said with a laugh. "He really is. Looks just like Emily." "I'm so happy for you, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "When can I come meet him?" He hesitated. "We're still getting settled. The pediatrician said we should limit visitors for a while." "Of course," I whispered. "Whenever you're ready." He thanked me, then hung up quickly because the baby was crying. That night, I sat by the window and looked at the stars. I tried to imagine what Noah's cry sounded like, what color his hair was, how his tiny fingers felt wrapped around Daniel's. For years I'd dreamed of the day I'd become a grandmother. I just never thought I'd meet him through a phone screen. 3 months later, I received an invitation in the mail, a digital printed card with gold lettering. Noah's baptism. It wasn't addressed to Mom. Just Margaret Hayes. I read it twice, then carefully set it on the table. It said family brunch to follow, but when I called to confirm, Daniel said quietly, "Mom, the brunch is mostly Emily's side of the family. There's limited space. But you can come to the ceremony if you'd like." "If I'd like," I repeated. "Of course I'd like." The church was about an hour away. I put on my best blue dress, the one Daniel always said made my eyes look ocean bright. I bought a small silver rattle, wrapped it neatly in tissue paper. When I arrived, the pews were full. Emily's parents greeted everyone warmly. Her mother looked perfectly put together in pearls. Daniel waved when he saw me, but didn't come over. I sat in the back, watching as the priest poured water over Noah's tiny head. He cried softly, and I felt tears fill my eyes. All I wanted was to hold him, just once. After the ceremony, people gathered outside for photos. I stood to the side, waiting for a chance to say hello. Emily's mother handed me a polite smile. Daniel approached briefly, baby in his arms. "Mom, this is Noah," he said, his tone friendly but formal. I reached out carefully. "He's beautiful." "Thanks," Daniel said. Then Emily called him for pictures. He turned, still holding the baby, and I watched as they posed together. Emily glowing, Daniel proud. Someone handed Emily's mother the baby for a photo, and I waited for my turn. It never came. After a few minutes, Daniel came back, slightly flustered. "Mom, thank you for coming. We really appreciate it." I nodded, smiling through the ache. "Of course, honey. I'm so proud of you." "Drive safe, okay?" he said. He kissed my cheek quickly, then turned to rejoin the group. I drove home in silence that day. No music, no radio. Just the sound of the tires humming against the road and the soft rattle of the gift still sitting, unopened, on the passenger seat. The next few months were the loneliest I can remember. Sometimes he'd send a picture of Noah, first smile, first tooth, but always through a group text, like I was one of many. Then one evening he called again. His voice was quiet. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said. "Anything." "Emily's been feeling a little uncomfortable with how often you send things. The clothes, the toys, the notes. She thinks it's too much pressure." I blinked. "Pressure? I didn't mean, Daniel, I just wanted to help. It's what grandmothers do." "I know," he said gently, "but she feels like you're overstepping sometimes." I could hear the apology in his voice, but also the exhaustion. "Maybe you could talk to her?" I asked softly. "I've tried," he said. "I think she just wants to set clear boundaries. For everyone's sake." There was that word again. Boundaries. I nodded slowly, though he couldn't see me. "If that's what she needs, I'll stop." "Thanks, Mom," he said. "I really appreciate that." I wanted to ask, what about what I need? But the words never came. A few weeks later, I got sick. Just the flu, but bad enough that the doctor told me to rest. I thought about calling Daniel, but I didn't want to worry him. He found out anyway from my sister, who dropped off soup. He called that evening. Mom, you should have told me, he said. I didn't want to bother you, I replied. You've got enough going on. He sighed. You're never a bother. But even as he said it, there was distance in his tone, gentle, polite distance. The next day, Emily called. It was the first time she'd ever called me directly. Hi, Margaret, she said, her voice crisp. Daniel mentioned you've been under the weather. I hope you're feeling better. I'm getting there, I said. Thank you. There was a pause. I just wanted to check in, she continued. Daniel worries a lot. And I know he feels guilty some. He doesn't have to, I said quietly. He's got his family now. Well, she replied. Your family too. We just all have to find balance, you know? Her words were kind enough, but they carried a polite finality. When the call ended, I sat for a long time in silence, listening to the wind outside. That was the day I realized the distance wasn't accidental anymore. It was chosen. The final straw came that Thanksgiving. I had spent the week preparing. Even though they hadn't confirmed their plans, I roasted a turkey, made stuffing, mashed potatoes, and his favorite cranberry bread. I told myself it was just in case they came. Around noon, the phone rang. My heart leapt. It was Daniel. Hey, Mom, he said slowly. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart, I replied. Are you on your way? He hesitated. About that. We're actually having dinner here this year. Emily's parents came into town, and it just made sense. Oh, I tried to sound cheerful. Of course. That's lovely. I wanted to call before you started cooking, he said. I looked at the table. The dishes laid out neatly, the smell of turkey filling the air. Too late for that, I said with a little laugh that came out thinner than I intended. He chuckled awkwardly. I'm sorry, Mom. Next year, okay? Sure, I said softly. We talked a few more minutes, then he said, Love you. But the word Mom never followed. When the call ended, I stood by the table for a long time, staring at the food I'd made. The house felt heavier than ever. I sat down, folded my hands, and whispered grace like I always did. Then I filled a single plate, ate quietly, and packed away the rest. Later that night, I walked outside. The air was cold and still. The stars were sharp against the dark sky. I closed my eyes and whispered, Thank you, God, for letting me love him this much. Even if he forgets, I won't. Inside, the phone sat silent on the counter. The last thing it held was a call log, Daniel, 12:03 p.m. And beneath it, a list of older calls growing farther apart as the months went by. That was the day I knew. The day the silence stopped feeling temporary. The day I realized my son hadn't just grown up. He had grown away. That was the day my son stopped calling me Mom. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges. It doesn't erase pain. It just teaches you how to live around it. After that Thanksgiving, I stopped expecting the phone to ring. At first, it was hard. I'd catch myself glancing toward it whenever I heard a vibration, a sound from the street, anything that could have been Daniel. But weeks passed, and nothing came. The ache that used to rise like a wave each morning eventually settled into something quieter, something I could live with. I began filling my days differently. I joined a reading group at the library, started volunteering at the local food pantry on Wednesdays. The people there were kind, the kind that doesn't pry, just smiles and says, Good to see you again, Margaret. I liked that. I liked being seen, even if it wasn't as Mom. At home, I tended to small things. I painted the living room, something I'd been meaning to do for years. I took long walks in the evenings, when the sun dipped low and the world turned gold. Sometimes I'd see families out with their children, laughter echoing through the park, and I'd smile, even when it hurt a little. People think loneliness is always loud, but sometimes it's peaceful. There's a rhythm to it. You start to hear your own thoughts clearly, the way you used to when life was slower. Every so often, I'd take out old photo albums, not to cry but to remember. To remind myself that what we had was real. That love like that doesn't vanish. It just changes shape. One evening, about 2 years after that Thanksgiving, I was sitting by the window with a cup of tea when I heard the mail slot click. I didn't think much of it, just another bill or advertisement, probably. But when I picked up the envelope, I saw Daniel's handwriting. It was shaky, a little rushed, but unmistakable. My heart fluttered as I sat down and opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter. Just a few lines. Imom. I know it's been a while. I'm sorry for not calling sooner. Life's been busy, but that's no excuse. I wanted to tell you we moved to a new house, closer to the lake. Noah's getting so big now. He started preschool this fall. He loves books just like I used to. I think you'd be proud of him. We'd love for you to come visit sometime. Emily says you should see the new place. Maybe next month if you're up for it. Love, Daniel. I sat there for a long time, tracing the words with my fingertips. He still signed it Love, Daniel. He hadn't said Mom in the letter, but somehow, it didn't matter. The next morning I wrote back. Dear Daniel, it's so good to hear from you. I've missed you more than words can say. I'd love to see you all, whenever it's a good time. Tell Noah I can't wait to meet him properly. And tell Emily thank you for the invitation. With love always. Mom. I dropped it in the mailbox and stood there for a while, the winter air cool on my cheeks. For the first time in years, my heart felt light. A few weeks later he called. Hey, he said, a little uncertain. Did you get my letter? I did, I said, smiling into the phone. And I sent one back. I know, he replied. That's why I'm calling. We'd really love for you to come by next Sunday if you can. It's nothing fancy, just dinner. I hesitated. 100 thoughts ran through my mind. What to wear, what to bring, what to say. But all I managed was, I'd love that. Great, he said, relief clear in his voice. Noah's excited to meet you. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time, letting it sink in. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something gentler, anticipation. That Sunday, I woke early. I took extra care getting ready. Not to impress anyone, but to feel like myself again. I wore a simple lavender blouse, pinned my hair up neatly, and baked a small apple pie. Not the grand feast I might have made years ago, just something warm, something that felt like home. The drive to their house was longer than I remembered. It was on the edge of town, near the lake, surrounded by tall trees and soft morning light. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Daniel standing on the porch. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he smiled, hesitant but real. Hi, he said softly. Daniel. Raplia. He stepped forward and hugged me. Not the polite, quick kind. A real hug. One that felt like the years between us were melting away, just a little. Inside, the house was bright and warm. I could hear small footsteps from another room, followed by a giggle. Then a little boy appeared, wide-eyed, curly-haired, clutching a toy truck. Noah, Daniel said gently. This is your grandma. Grandma. The word landed softly, like a whisper of grace. The boy studied me for a moment, then smiled shyly. Hi, sweetheart, I said, kneeling slightly. It's so nice to finally meet you. He held out his toy. Truck, he said proudly. I laughed, tears prickling my eyes. That's a fine truck you've got there. Emily appeared then, holding a tray of lemonade. She looked different, calmer somehow. Older too. Life had softened her edges. Margaret, she said, smiling gently. I'm so glad you came. Thank you for inviting me, I replied. Dinner was simple. Roast chicken, vegetables, and laughter that felt a little unsure at first but grew easier as the evening went on. Noah chattered the way children do, filling the quiet with stories about school and his toy collection. Daniel listened, smiling at him in that way I used to see when he was small. After dinner, we sat on the porch while Noah played in the yard. The air was cool, the lake glimmering in the distance. Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling softly. I've missed this, he said. I turned to him. Missed what? Just sitting with you, he said quietly. Things got complicated for a while. I guess I didn't know how to balance everything. I nodded. It happens. Life pulls us in different directions. He looked down, then met my eyes. I'm sorry, Mom. The word Mom hit me like sunlight through a cloudy window. I felt tears rise, but I didn't let them fall. There's nothing to be sorry for, I said softly. You were finding your way. We all do. He reached over and took my hand. His grip was warm, steady. I should have called more. I should have. I shook my head. Daniel, I said gently, you came home. That's enough. For a while we just sat there, watching Noah chase fireflies. The sky turned pink, then purple, then a deep velvet blue. Do you remember, I said quietly, when you were little and you used to blow on dandelions in the yard? He smiled. Yeah. You'd always ask me what I wished for. And you'd always say, you mom. He laughed softly, his eyes shining. Guess I did, didn't I? I smiled, my chest tight but full. Maybe wishes don't disappear either. Maybe they just change. He nodded slowly. I think you're right. When I drove home that night, the air felt lighter. The moon hung low over the lake, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I knew things wouldn't go back to how they used to be. Life doesn't rewind like that. But something had shifted. Not enough to erase the distance, but enough to bridge it. A few days later, I got a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures. One tall Daniel, one medium Emily, and one small with curly hair Noah. Beside them, a 4th figure with gray hair stood smiling. Underneath, in uneven letters, it said, Grandma loves trucks. I laughed until I cried. Then I pinned it on the fridge, right next to an old photo of Daniel as a boy holding a dandelion in his hand. That night, before bed, I sat by the window and whispered, thank you. Not to anyone in particular, maybe to God, maybe to time, maybe to the quiet itself. Because in the end, peace doesn't come from getting back what you lost. It comes from loving it enough to let it live differently. And as I turned off the lamp, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. The house didn't sound empty anymore. It sounded like home again. It's been 3 years since that evening by the lake. I still remember the way the sky looked, that deep shade of blue just before night takes over. I remember Daniel's laugh, and little Noah chasing fireflies like they were bits of magic. Now, whenever the house gets too quiet, I close my eyes and picture that moment. The sound of their voices. The warmth of being needed. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Daniel calls sometimes now, not every week, but often enough. He tells me about his job, about Noah's new obsession with dinosaurs, about how Emily's learning to bake bread. He even asks for my recipes sometimes. When the phone rings and I see his name, I still get that same flutter in my chest, the same one I used to feel when he was little and said, Mom, look what I made. We're not the same as we were before. But that's all right. Life has a way of changing shape, like the shoreline after the tide. It doesn't mean the sea is gone. It's just found a new rhythm. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, I sit by the window with my tea and think about all the years in between. The laughter, the silence, the tears I never let anyone see. And instead of wishing to relive it, I find myself simply grateful that I lived it at all. I've learned something in these later years of my life. Love doesn't always stay loud. It fades, softens, changes tone. But if you listen closely, it's still there, humming in the background of everything you do. There was a time I thought losing my son's voice meant losing my place in his heart. But now I understand. Silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it's just space. Space to grow, space to come back when the heart is ready. When I visit them now, Noah always runs to the door shouting, Grandma's here. He wraps his arms around me like I'm his whole world. And every time, I feel that same quiet joy I felt the first time Daniel said Mom. It's different, yes. But it's still love. The other day, as I was leaving, Daniel walked me to my car. He hugged me tightly, the kind of hug that lingers. I don't say it enough, he murmured. But thank you for waiting. I smiled and touched his cheek, the way I used to when he was small. A mother's love, I told him, doesn't keep count of waiting. It just keeps loving. He nodded, eyes glistening, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one running through dandelions, laughing, calling me Mom. When I drove away, the road ahead shimmered with the late afternoon light. The trees swayed gently, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I could still hear his voice, soft, sure, calling me home again. I think about that sometimes, how love travels in circles, how it leaves and returns like the seasons. You can't hold it still, but you can cherish every time it comes back around. These days, my house feels different. Not full, not empty, just enough. There's a calm to it. A peace that only comes after you've walked through years of longing and found your way to gratitude. And on certain evenings, when the light slants just right through the window, I take a deep breath and whisper, "Thank you," to the quiet. Because it's in that stillness that I finally understand. Being a mother was never about being needed every day. It was about being remembered, even after the world went on. So I sit here now older, softer, at peace. The clock ticks gently in the corner. The kettle hums. And outside, in the yard, dandelions sway in the wind, little white seeds waiting for someone to make a wish. Maybe somewhere out there, my son still does. And if he does, I hope he knows I'm still wishing too. Not for the past, but for the love that still lives quietly between us. Because no matter how far time carries us, the heart always finds its way home.